Okay, folks, I think we'll call the meeting to order. And as required under the Planning Act, a public meeting is being held prior to the committee making a decision on these applications. First thing I'll do is introduce the committee. I'm Mr. Robertson, and we've got Ms. Archer here, Mr. Strangway, Ms. Robinson, Ms. Richardson, and Councillor Yeo. And staff in person here, we've got the Manager of Planning, Ms. Berry. We've got our Secretary Treasurer, Mr. Lahe, and our Recording Secretary, Ms. Crockford. And via electronic participation, we've got Ms. Murchison, our Chief Building Official. Hello there, Chief Building Official. All right. Can I get a motion to put the agenda on the floor as printed? Ms. Archer, Ms. Robinson, any comments or questions with respect to the agenda? Being none, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? No money floating around with these inflation rates, I guess. All right. The minutes of the last meeting. I think everyone was here pretty well, but are there any, first, before I get a motion, are there any comments or questions with respect to the minutes? All right, then can I get a hand to, okay, Mr. Strangway, Ms. Richardson. No further comments or questions then? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right, for the benefit of everyone online and here, the committee will hear comments, gather information, and may ask questions to clarify statements made. The committee may ask and answer questions or redirect questions to the appropriate person. Please note that any information or comments given to the committee during this meeting, they're considered evidence. We will first hear from staff and then the applicant or his or her agent. We will then hear from any person in support of or from those who have questions, concerns, or are opposed to the application. Finally, the applicant or his or her agent will have an opportunity to respond to any of the statements made to the committee. And when you come on screen to speak, you give us your name, and we will afford you 10 minutes to make your presentation. No one has ever gone that far, but we afford you that amount of time. And if you find you can't possibly get all of the information in within that 10-minute period, then I will ask the committee if they would afford you a couple of more minutes. But I don't think that's ever happened, so we'll move along with that. All right. Getting to the agenda, we're now dealing with file number D20-2021-043, and this is 4953 Monk Road, Geographic Township of Somerville. And Ms. Berry, go ahead, please.
How are we? A little better? Okay, thank you. Thought that the biggest obstacle here would have been figuring out the clicker with the PowerPoint presentation, but I think we're cooking with gas here. Okay. All right, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Here we are in the hamlet of Kinmount, 4953 Monk Road. This application was submitted by Kent Randall of EcoView Consulting Services on behalf of the owners, Julie and Andrew Austin. The purpose of the application is to increase the maximum lot coverage from 5% to 8.24% in order to recognize an existing horse stable. Size of the horse stable is just under 1177 square meters. The lot itself is about 3.6 acres, 1.5 hectares. It's got private well and septic services and access to a municipal road. The owners had applied for a building permit in 2018. It was canceled after being incomplete after 12 months when land title issues remain unresolved at that time. Kawartha Conservation, in their review and enforcement of matters in source water protection areas, had actually flagged with the city's building division in 2020 that the horse stable was in fact constructed. And at that point, enforcement was commenced. A building permit application was submitted in February of last year, And through review of that building permit application, the zoning deficiency, that is the nature of this application, was identified. All right, so here is an aerial shot to give us some perspective on how the horse stable is sited in the lot and amidst the surrounding land uses. We see a heavily vegetative area, significant grade increase from the road to the west, uses being predominantly rural residential, commercial at the road, and recreational across Monk Road towards Burnt River, as well as the rail trail. And we just see a portion of that at the edge of the aerial to the right. On approach, we can see the beginning of the grade change to the west behind the owner's adjacent business. And here, sandwiched between the business to the north and the owner's residence to the south, is the driveway leading west into the interior of the lot towards the stable. All right, so first, the driveway from the road with the residential accessory structure on the right. Next, further up the driveway towards the stable. And finally, a look backwards down the driveway easterly towards Monk Road. All right, so finally here, a few images of the horse stable itself. South-facing front entrance, east roll-up doors, to the bottom, close-up of the end wall and the long view. Right, and the next slide here shows us the building plans. So let's flip back to the site plan for just a minute. I'd like to summarize why we've concluded that the minor variance should be approved. So that is going to take us back to slide 4. All right. So, of course, to determine whether the application is minor, we've assessed the impact of the stable on environmental features, municipal functions, and the adjacent land uses. Well, because the site is designated for restricted land use under the Clean Water Act, the proponent is required to obtain a permit from KRCA's RMO, that's Risk Management Official, before this committee makes a decision on an application at the site. This is, of course, because drinking water is vulnerable in relation to the Kinmount municipal water supply system in this location, and that's an IPZ, intake protection zone. Okay? So vulnerable areas are determined in the city's official plan as either, as this one is, an IPZ, or a wellhead protection area, also known as a WIPA, if that acronym rings any bells. So the site is designated for restricted land use under Section 59 of the Clean Water Act. The Section 59 notice identifies whether an application or change in activity complies with whatever the applicable source protection plan is. And here we're dealing with the Trent SPP. Under this whole process, the RMO determines whether the use is prohibited. Prohibited uses, just to remind us all, things like waste disposal sites, pesticides, fuel storage, of course, intensive agriculture, the handling of manure in cases like that. Those types of activities, of course, require a risk management plan. The RMO determined that the horse stable isn't subject to either prohibition or the necessity of a risk management plan, and so no threat to the drinking water source present as a result of this application and this development. All right, so next, no anticipated impacts on the function of the municipal right-of-way with respect to access or drainage. And finally, the stable is well behind the owner's dwelling, set back a significant distance from the street and the neighboring uses. It's screened from the street, in part because of the topography and the dense vegetation. In my estimation, no anticipated impacts on neighboring properties. Okay, so with that, I will skip ahead here just a couple of slides. So we determined that the proposal is desirable and appropriate for the use here because the size and the location of the stable serves the recreational needs of the owners, doesn't preclude the future development on adjacent lands. The stable was constructed in an area that was previously disturbed, so would not impact natural resources in this area. Turning to the final sort of 2 tests of the minor variance, starting with the zoning bylaw. The application maintains the intent of the rural general zone in Somerville. It does permit the horse stable use, and it complies with the minimum distance separation. For comparative purposes, had this lot been closer to about a hectare in size, recall it's about a hectare, 1.5, so the coverage for accessory buildings would actually increase to 8% if the lot was slightly smaller. So within a reasonable threshold, in my estimation. The intent behind maximum lot coverage is to limit overdevelopment and to ensure that adequate open space is available for drainage. In this case, the size of the horse stable doesn't impede stormwater infiltration and maintains ample open space. I'll add the scale of the increased square footage is imperceptible from the street. And finally, test 4, the application maintains the intent and purpose of the Hamlet settlement area land use designation in the city's official plan. Policies in the Hamlet settlement area are there to accommodate small-scale, both residential and non-residential development. The horse stable maintains the existing character and amenities. The property and the stable itself adequately serviced, does not impact soil, water, or other natural resources. Moving on to comments as a result of circulation in accordance with the Planning Act. We didn't receive any public comments. Though there were no concerns from the city's internal agencies, either from the septic division or engineering, the city's building division flagged the requirements to, of course, complete the pending building permit. So, Mr. Chair, on this basis, I conclude that the variance application satisfies the 4 tests, should be approved. You may have noticed that the condition to complete the building permit within 4 months sits there as a condition in the report, and this is standard practice when we are dealing with an enforcement matter, is to reduce the time before the decision would sunset or would lapse. All right, so I'll turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you, Manager Barry. Are there any questions of the manager? Yes, go ahead, Ms. Richardson.
Through you, excuse me, through you, you noted in there that there were land title issues unresolved in 2018. Have those since been resolved?
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, they have been, and I'll turn to the lot configuration here just to give us some insight into what the lands looked like at one point, which prevented the issuance of a building permit, because if we look at the northerly of these 2 parcels, it certainly would appear, and is so, that there is no frontage, and so that was one of the issues. This is a very unique configuration that we don't see the whole picture actually here. This property has 1 municipal address, 2 tax assessment roll numbers, and 3 PIN numbers, property identification numbers. The third, let's say, segment or PIN parcel, if I could put it that way, represents the area closest to Monk Road. If you were to envision a rectangle at the little piece that reaches out towards Monk Road, where that dwelling and the accessory structure, the shed, sit, that is the area of the third PIN. So no further title issues. The owner and the agent were able to produce the relevant title searches necessary for us to conclude that the parcels had merged.
Another question. In 2018, the property was not compatible, but now it is. Is that because of the previous question that it resolved issues, land titles matter?
Mr. Chair, yeah, simply put, yes.
Further questions from the committee? Ms. Archer.
Through you, please. So I understand that it's a permissible use to have a horse stable in a hamlet area?
Mr. Chair, yes, the zoning is rural general RG, and in Somerville that permits this, let's say, limited intensity of a rural type use. So rural residential, still within the hamlet designation, the zoning permits it. It does satisfy the minimum distance separation criteria for livestock. Based on the livestock limit, there are no more than 5 horses able to be housed in that structure.
Anything further, committee? I just have one, if I may, and I do appreciate that I'm inquiring after the fact, but was there any reason given as to why they chose to ignore the cancellation?
Mr. Chair, so that I understand your question, the owners, is the suggestion that they proceeded to build without a permit?
Like, not just a case of going without a permit, but they'd applied for a permit. It was then canceled due to various issues. They chose to build anyway. So I'm just curious as to whether, was there any response as to why that occurred?
Mr. Chair, if I may ask, let's speak to our chief building official who is on the Zoom call with us, just in the event that there are some particulars with respect to the building permit, both the one that was canceled as well as the one that remains open, to fill in the blanks for us.
Okay. Did you hear my question, Ms. Murchison?
I did. So looking at the records that we have here, the permit was canceled. The letter was sent out beginning of August of 2020, and we didn't hear back from the property owner. It was not until the end of the month of August that the Conservation Authority brought it to our attention that it had been indeed constructed. And we did not actually have any contact with the owner until October of 2020. So I don't think we've ever been given an explanation as to why they went forward.
All right, then just a follow-up. I read in here somewhere that the fee, the permit has tripled as a result. Is that, when is that collected? Is that during the process or at the end of the building permit process?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is supposed to be paid up front at time of application. I'm just going to pull up the permit here and see if it's actually been paid at this time. But it is supposed to be paid at the beginning of an application process. It is a fee for service. Bear with me for 1 second.
Mr. Chair, while our chief building official is taking a look at her files, forgive me, without access to the Zoom screen, I'm not sure who we have in our virtual audience, so I'm unaware of whether the applicant on the file is actually in attendance, and perhaps Mr. Randall, if present, would have a contribution to this.
So I can actually fill you in. Yeah, the permit fee and penalty have been paid.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions of the chief building official? All right, being none, thank you for that, Ms. Murchison. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? And your name, please?
Yes. My name's Beverly Saunders. I work for EcoView Consulting. I'm here on behalf of Kent Randall, and obviously on behalf of our client as well. So I'm just here to answer any questions that you might have, and we appreciate the report that's been provided by City of Kawartha Lakes. I do very quickly just want to touch on the question regarding the permit. I think in terms of moving forward without the permits in place, I've spoken to the client about that. They had said that they had submitted their application for the permit and believed that there would be no issue, and so proceeded before receiving the notice that the permit had been canceled. And so then when they received the permit cancellation, they tried to figure out what they needed to do, essentially, and they got us involved, and then we started proceeding from there. I think they'd just gotten some bad advice that that the builder had told them that they didn't believe it would be an issue, and so they just proceeded based on incorrect advice. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any questions of the deputy? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that, your presentation. All right, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? All right, being none. Committee, where are we? Councillor, moving as printed?
As printed.
Do I have a seconder? Ms. Robinson? Any further comments or questions with respect to the motion on the floor? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right. We're now dealing with file number D20-2022-023, and this is 111 Cameron Drive, Geographic Township of Finland. And again, the manager of planning, Ms. Berry. Go ahead, please.
All right, Mr. Chair, thank you. So next we're at 111 Cameron Drive in the Southview Estates community of Cameron with an application submitted by the owners, Lindsay and Shawnee Murray, to permit an above-ground swimming pool in the front yard. And that would be not the interior side or rear yard where the bylaw would require such a structure to be located. The lot is just under 1,400 square meters, roughly 15,000 square feet. It's got municipal water, private septic system, and access to a municipal road. Here we see the location of the proposed pool in the front yard between the Cameron Drive right-of-way and the front of the dwelling. You'll also probably note there at the very top of the screen, Southview Drive to the north, and that provides access to the garage in the rear yard. There is a driveway from Southview to that garage area. The application Before I tell you more about that part of the application, let's go ahead and see the next slide, which I believe should be an aerial shot to bring the site plan to life. Gives us a bit of an idea of the, not just vegetation, of course, the structures that we saw on the previous site plan, as well as the sort of oval-shaped circle in the front yard, roughly approximating the site of the proposed pool. Here, the lot is sort of in the context of a low-density residential neighborhood that surrounds it. And now, let's go back to the site plan and review our evaluation of the tests. So the application, in my estimation, does meet the intent and purpose of the rural residential type 3 zone in the Fenland zoning bylaw. That zone permits the existing dwelling and its accessory structures and uses. The requirement to cite accessory structures inside and rear yards generally intended to prioritize the presence of the dwelling as the primary use. Now, keeping in mind we're dealing with a through lot. Yards in cases like this have a tendency to be used and function not by strict definition. Are there 2 rear yards? Are there 2 front yards? The bylaw does tell us how to determine one from the other based on the determination of the front lot line, and in this case, that's established in the block by prior construction. All right, so other factors that influence the proposed site are the garage and the existing septic system in the rear yard, while the propane tank, if we look over towards the right of the site plan, the right of the dwelling, we'll see the propane tank, generator, air conditioning unit, and then of course on the opposite side of the dwelling to the left, some residential structures, the deck, the sunroom. These are all sort of encumbrances or additional rationale to provide us to conclude that there is more space in what essentially is the front yard, because trying to site the pool in a different configuration wouldn't meet the required side yard setbacks either if some of those structures were to be relocated or removed. The application maintains the waterfront designation in the city's official plan. That designation does permit limited development in proximity to lakes and rivers. The pool in the front yard, compatible with the established low-density residential character. It maintains a low building profile, and by taking a look at the site in person, driving through the neighborhood, blends in with the natural surroundings. So before we move on to results of the circulation, I'll just take you on a little tour down Cameron Drive, just east from the Murray's lot at number 135. Again, the Murrays are at number 111. Here we see an above-ground pool in the front yard. We do anticipate that the proposed pool will be compatible with the neighborhood as this one is. The application is desirable and appropriate for the use of the land. It's a permitted accessory structure, we know that, in the residential lot. The Fenland bylaw tells us so. It's intended to add to the owner's enjoyment, of course, of their property, but also providing them with a wonderful opportunity to enhance their level of activity and daily exercise, which they emphasized was quite important to them. The owners intend to landscape the area surrounding the pool with armor stone, shrubs, and flowers. All right, so to wrap things up, moving on to comments as a result of circulation in accordance with the Act, we didn't receive any public comments, and the internal city divisions had no concerns or objections. Pretty short and sweet. So on this basis, Mr. Chair, again, concluding that the minor variance does meet the 4 tests, we recommend that it be approved. Back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Are there any questions of the planner? Yeah, Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Berry, just one really small, quick question. I noticed you used the term waterfront, but there are a number of 1 or 2 streets between this and the lake. I'm wondering how that comes out as a designation of waterfront.
Mr. Chair, through you, to the member, waterfront is a larger area of land that extends beyond just the shoreline, and it is not uncommon to see not just shoreline properties as well as backlots, those being the lots adjacent to a road perhaps that separates shoreline lots from a water body, but in fact covering, in some cases, an entire community in proximity to the water, again, whether it's a river or a lake. So we do see this throughout the city, that the designation expands typically around the built form that's there. So again, not just limited to the shoreline itself.
Thank you.
Learn something new every day, because I didn't know that either. Mr. Archer, go ahead.
Through you, please, to Ms. Berry, do we have a picture, or did I miss it, of the actual 111 Cameron Drive?
We have an aerial. We don't have the street view. Let me
You
pop
don't have
that
a
up
street
for
view.
us.
Okay, no, I had the aerial, I just was wondering. I was just interested in seeing the actual building itself, the dwelling, and visualizing the placement of the pool. Is there a front driveway?
Mr. Chair, through you, there is not a front driveway, and much like this property up the street, again, personal choice, personal details, but I'll say generally speaking, the design of the home being a single-story sort of bungalow framed construction is very similar to 111. And I will share, because I'm not proud, it was pouring with rain the day that I was there, and quite frankly, the photos didn't turn out the best. And with that poor resolution, I opted to not include them in the presentation. My apologies.
Anything further from committee? I have a question, Ms. Berry, and I guess we probably sound like a broken record over this, but I notice, it has to do with KRCA, but I noticed you specifically mentioned in the report that a permit will be required for the proposed development, and yet we don't see a condition for that. And the reason, again, going back, and perhaps I should get the chief building official on the line, and just because she indicated some time ago that if in fact there was a condition, and I know Ms. Richardson, you've been through this 100 times, if there was a condition, but I see we specifically mentioned it in our report this time, it's not just in correspondence from them, so, and the chief building official had indicated that it helped them as a red flag during the permit process, because they might otherwise miss the fact that KRC would need to be notified. So can we bring up the chief building official, and maybe I'll ask her that. You heard my comments there, Ms. Murchison, so could you respond to that?
Sure. The KRCA requirement, if we're talking about a building permit under the Building Code Act, is applicable law. And so in those instances, it's not required that you put a condition into a minor variance, because it will be captured through the building permit. When you're dealing with something such as a municipal bylaw permit, so a pool permit, sign permit, Those are different because they're not bound by that same applicable law. So it actually isn't a bad thing if you put a condition in on a minor variance to require a conservation permit relating to a pool permit.
I guess I got a big question mark then. Should we or shouldn't we then put this in? Ms. Murchison?
So this is, I believe this one is strictly just a pool permit. So I would say that it's not a bad idea to put it in, because then it will remind my staff, or let my staff know, that the Conservation Authority has already flagged that it needed a permit.
And that's exactly why I brought it up, because, and I know Ms. Richardson has in the past too, because I heard you say that some time ago, and it just makes sense that if there's a requirement for that, then it should be red flagged so that it's not missed somewhere along the line, because we're all human. And so thank you very much for that, and I'll ask the committee to amend that when we get there then. Thank you. Any further questions of the manager?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the, we don't have a survey here that shows the lot line. We just have a hand sketch. And I'm looking at that blue line that goes around the property, and it appears, right there. No, go, yeah. And it goes right through the garage. And I'm wondering, is there a compliance issue there?
Is that a question for
Is
the
there
manager?
an encroachment, or, yes, a question.
Ms.
for
Berry?
Ms. Berry, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to the member, the site plan that you're looking at here is quite a bit more accurate than is the aerial photography, which is just a layer in the GIS. The parcel fabric in the GIS, and flipping back to it so that we're looking at what I'm talking about, is not based on a survey. So we take these lines with a grain of salt. The blue line is not indicative of the surveyed property boundaries. So we know that there is ample distance there. We meet this rear yard setback as it is there from Southview to the garage.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further for committee? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? All right, I'm advised no. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Committee. And as amended? All right, Ms. Archer, do I have a seconder? Mr. Strangway? All right, any further comments or questions on the motion as amended? And that being that we add the condition with respect to the KRCA permit. All right, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-024, and this is 32 Nook Street, Geographic Township of Fenelon. And again, our manager of planning, Ms. Berry. Go ahead, please.
All right, Mr. Chair, thank you. So we see the lot here adjacent to Cameron Lake, of course, the address 32 Nook Street, as we just heard. This application has been submitted to us by the city through the chief building official, Suzanne Murchison, to recognize a replacement boathouse. There are two zone provisions related to accessory use to be varied in this case. First, to increase the maximum lot coverage from 225 square meters to 316 square meters. And second, to recognize the upper level of the replacement boathouse. The lot is over half an acre. It's just about 1.5 acres. It has a private well and septic system. It's accessed by a private right-of-way across adjacent lands owned by Mr. Robert Polsom, and it extends that right-of-way south from Walnut Street. So the owners, the Bedwells, have undertaken substantial improvements to the property over the last 5 years. As we just about make out on this slide, albeit very lightly, the existing cottage was demolished and rebuilt. A new timber frame garage has been built, and the matter for today, the replacement boathouse. The site of the boathouse is identified by that red circle on the slide. The owners undertook construction of the replacement boathouse after receiving permits from both Huerta Conservation as well as from the city. Now, through an inspection at the framing stage of the boathouse, the zoning deficiencies that I just identified were noted at that time. So because of that, the city filed the application for relief to be evaluated by us and to be determined by this committee. Right, so should the committee decide to approve the relief sought through this application, then the building permit can be closed following the end of the statutory process. So as noted at the outset, here's how we access the lot from North Line Road, west across Walnut Street, and south down Nook Street. Get an idea here of the surrounding land uses, predominantly agricultural, rural, and shoreline residential. I've zoomed in on the aerial photo from the previous slide here just to once again indicate the site of the boathouse identified by that red circle. So this imagery is taken before the new garage was constructed to the south of the dwelling. And you can see the dwelling sited just above the number 32. So here's a shot from a neighbor's dock to the north. We recognize the structure is substantially built, but we still must evaluate its merits to remain. We start with an assessment of impact on environmental features, of course, municipal functions, and on neighboring properties. So with respect to the environment, KRCA issued a permit to demolish and replace the boathouse in 2019 as per their regulated area along the shoreline. The site is also in proximity to provincially significant woodlands. The boathouse replaces the previous structure. It was already in a disturbed area of the property, and so no impacts to that natural heritage feature, the provincially significant woodland. Nook Street, being a private right-of-way, means there are no impacts on the function of any municipal rights-of-way. In my estimation, the impacts to adjoining properties are negligible given the distance to the nearest shoreline neighbor and the low building profile of the boathouse. Its design and location quite well screened by vegetation from the lakeside that we can also see at the time that this picture was taken. The site is secluded with no neighbors on the land side. The acreage, the shape, and the configuration of the lot can withstand the size of the boathouse without being overbuilt. All right, so we've concluded the proposal is desirable and appropriate for the use of land. Replacing the boathouse provides an opportunity, of course, for additional boat storage, items related to boating, while the upper level is intended for just that, storage. Now, very similar architectural features means the boathouse complements the dwelling and the garage quite well. A little unorthodox, but I'm going to skip ahead here and we will return. All right. Do we all have our magnifying glasses out? So the covered deck and balcony, as well as the interior space that's identified right there in the middle of the slide as a bonus room on the upper level floor plan can be indicative of space used for purposes other than storage. Of course, that said, given the location of the boathouse in the floodplain, limited by private access from Nook Street, using the upper level of the boathouse for a non-storage use, for example, habitable space, in our opinion, would be most inappropriate. It would also contravene, of course, the official plan policies and the zoning bylaw provisions for ARUs, additional residential units. The building plans contain no plumbing features associated with either sanitary or kitchen facilities, and the owners have expressed their intention to use the space strictly for storage. All right, so as promised, I will pull it back here. And talk about the zoning bylaw. All right, so the lot is zoned limited service residential, LSR. That permits the existing dwelling and its accessory buildings and structures, including the boathouse. So Finland zoning bylaw, accessory uses, that's what we're focused on here, they're subject to coverage in two ways, by a percent as well as by square footage. So the intent here is to limit the massing or presence of accessory uses regardless of the size of the overall lot. It can also serve to maintain the primacy of the residential use. Again, this is all very site-specific and relative to the configuration of the lot and the placement of the other structures. So the increased square footage to 316 that's being sought through this application, an increase from the maximum 225, it reflects the collective total of all accessory structures, not just the boathouse, because that includes the timber frame garage, as well as the boathouse. And notwithstanding the increased square footage, the collective lot coverage, taking into account the ground floor area only, so that would be the building footprints, so not all the collective square footage, just the building footprints, which is ground floor area. The garage and the boathouse together are about 1.25 percentage points, okay, so 1.25%. The maximum permitted in this zone for accessory structures is up to 8%. And because I know you've read the report very closely, you'll note that 1.25% is less than the figure that is quoted in the report, and that's 6.76. That includes the gross floor area, okay, so the upper levels that are within those accessory structures, both the garage, workshop, as well as the boathouse. The other piece that's included in that gross floor would be other sort of, I'll call them peripheral structures. We had seen them just on the previous slide of the floor plan, and that would be things like the deck, balcony space, that all kind of goes into that collective total for gross floor area. Still below the 8% max, but certainly above the 1.25% building footprint, which is what's of key importance here. All right, so for context, when we add the dwelling's ground floor area, recognizing that the LSR zone permits a total lot coverage of 30%, we actually land just over 2%. So 30% would be all structures, the dwelling, the garage, the boathouse. In an LSR zone, these can go up to 30% coverage, and we land, again, just about 2%, entirely based on the size of the total lot area at that 0.5 hectare mark. All right, numbers only tell part of the story. So what we see on the site is accessory square footage that is distributed across multiple structures, and overall, not perceptible in terms of that percentage point or square footage difference. I'm going to turn for a few minutes to the provision for height. In the Fenland bylaw, accessory uses are subject to height in two ways as well. So we just noted the two provisions that cover coverage, square footage, as well as percents. With respect to height, quantitatively, 4.5 meters is the height maximum. Qualitatively, distinguishes a single story from two-story structures. The upper level here doesn't exceed the permitted height, so we're fine there, 4.5 meters. The upper level here doesn't exceed the permitted height, but of course it's above a single story, so we need to look at that. The provision for limiting use to a single story is intended to prevent both the potential for living space, but also to maintain that lower building profile to uphold the shoreline character. All right, so to that end, the property is designated waterfront in the city's official plan. That permits seasonal, but also limited permanent residential development in proximity to the lake. The goal here is to recognize and protect the established low-density residential character and to uphold the character through massing policies. In our assessment, the siting and design of the boathouse amidst the vegetation at this site does blend in with the surroundings, and that's my opinion, and I'll take us through a couple of pictures here that we landed on before. And again, just to give us an idea of, not so evident here because of the time of year of the aerial. We see more ground cover than we do see canopy. So, of course, spring, summer, and a lot more green. So moving on to comments as a result of circulation in accordance with the Act. Since this report was written, we did receive a few calls and emails from two neighbors one of whom submitted a letter. I understand that's been placed in your packages today. We discussed how the application came to pass. After the boathouse was under construction, that was a real sort of bone of contention. How coverage is calculated, because it is not simple and not straightforward. The implications of the building permit process, and I trust I have captured our responses earlier in this presentation to you. The internal city divisions, both septic and engineering, had no issues or objections. The building division flagged completion of the building permit, of course, is going to be needed. That was identified at the outset. We've included, again, that reduced time frame in condition 2 so that this element is captured. All right, so Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you. We have concluded, after evaluating this application and its merits, that the variance, in our estimation, satisfies the 4 tests and should be approved. I will turn it to you now.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Berry, do you know this is a replacement boathouse. Was the original boathouse a 2-story boathouse or just 1 story?
Mr. Chair, through you, to the member, I understand it was a single story. And if I may, I should ask if there's a follow-up there, because I don't want to interrupt your follow-up or your train of thought. My intention here was to flip back to the site plan and to give us an idea of the difference in size and siting of the 2 boathouses, just because I know that I've included that in as an additional appendix to your reports and will be part of the conditions should the committee elect to consider them. With that extended answer, please continue.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Good for you. The reason I asked the question is because we've dealt with a number of these types of boathouses before, and being a 2-story, and I see the doors in it and so on, you address the height issue, but I'm just wondering, how a replacement became, a 2-story boathouse with the potential, and I use the word potential, for using that space other than storage.
Was a question there, I guess, Mr. Strangway?
Yes, my question is, going from a 1-story to a 2-story with, I noticed the entrance doors on the 2nd level. So obviously there's a good, while it doesn't exceed the height limit, it appears that there's a potential there for usable living space in that area.
Ms. Berry?
Sure, Mr. Chair, I'll just note that at least according to the zoning bylaw, the terminology of replacement doesn't indicate an exact either replica. One doesn't equal the other, meaning the same. The one doesn't have to be the same. A replacement can be different. I would ask our chief building official just to weigh in with respect to whether the building permit application process distinguishes what replacement means, if that's helpful to you, but certainly not with respect to the zoning bylaw.
Well, let's see what Ms. Murchison has to say. You've heard the discussions, Ms. Murchison. Could you respond?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, in the building department, the term replacement to us is just merely a label. It doesn't define any exactness to replicate something. It's just simply a label to tell us that there was something there before, and we're putting back a replacement of the same structure. If that helps.
Mr. Strangway, any follow-up?
I guess my follow-up would be, would this have to have permission from Trent Severn or Trent Severn? Because I know Neighbors Vars just put up a new boathouse, and I was surprised at how small it still was. And they said in order to get the permit, they had to replicate the square footage, and they could not enlarge it without additional implications.
So, Ms. Murchison, Ms. Berry, who wants to respond to that? Ms. Murchison?
Sure, I'll take it. Through the chair. In this instance, this is considered a dry land boathouse, so it is not actually in contact with the shoreline. And for those type of boathouses, Trent Severn does not weigh in. However, the Conservation Authority did have jurisdiction over this, so they did issue a permit for the replacement. And they, the information that is attached to their permit did include the site plan that showed the footprint was increasing.
Follow up?
Okay, that's fine for now. Thank you very much.
Ms. Robinson first.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So my concern, and I realize in this circumstance, there isn't even an applicant here, so I don't know who answers this question. The purpose of this building is a boathouse, but I'm looking at the photograph of it showing where the doors are. If you could put that up on the screen. And it's not even built. Could you put the photograph?
Sorry,
that
which one?
shows this one here, that shows the two doors? It's not even built with a way for boats to go in and out of those doors. If you, with all of that large armor stone and then stone below that, if you were to put the marine railway on top of that, those doors probably don't have enough clearance for any boat to get through. It doesn't even look like those doors are ever going to be used for boats. And I don't know whether that's a question or a comment, but it's a
Well,
concern
yeah.
because the whole premise of this structure is that it's a boathouse, and it has not been built to be a functional boathouse.
No, I hear you, and I'm agreeing. I think, so it does create some suspicion, I suppose.
Sure.
Ms. Berry, did you? Ms. Murchison? Okay, inquiring just how come this is being called a boathouse when in fact it looks like there's no access to the water provided or potentially intended. So does someone want to try that one?
I'll take a stab at it. So I can give you a couple of comments in that the owner has confirmed that there are boats to be stored in this building. We are not at a finished state yet. We haven't issued a final inspection. That could be potentially this year's project was to get the railway or whatever to get the boats in there. However, just dealing with past building permits for boathouses and zoning interpretations that staff have given from planning, there's no cookie cutter of what a boathouse looks like. And so we sometimes have to be a little bit more open-minded and look at the definition of a boathouse, which in the zoning bylaw will tell you that it's for the storage of boat and boat-related items. So we've had people build what looked like a shed before with just a small door on it because their boat was a canoe or their boat was a small boat. So us making this assumption that because there's big overhead doors and then Armor Rock, there'll never be a boat in it, I don't know if we can make that assumption. That's just my 2 cents.
All right. Ms. Berry?
Yeah, I appreciate the comment, especially with respect to the definition of boathouse that our chief building official just sort of alluded to, and that was the track that I was on, and if you'll indulge, I'll just perhaps let the committee know how the zoning bylaw defines boathouse. I think it's relevant here. So that's where I was going with this. It's boathouse is an accessory building or structure designed or used for the sheltering or storage of a boat or other forms of water transportation, an accessory thereof, excluding human habitation, not including any other use associated with human habitation. So again, the sheltering of or storage of boats. Fenland Township zoning bylaw.
Yeah, so there's nowhere does it specify there must be access to water or anything. It's strictly storage, so. Anything further from, oh.
There it is. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, and all due respect to the committee members. I'm listening to the comments, and it's going way beyond what we should be talking about in this instance. It's brought to us as a boathouse. No matter the name, it's a boathouse by definition. And as a builder, and as a member of this committee, and as a counselor, To call this a two-story building is a bit of a misnomer, and at very most, it's a story and a half. What I call it is a well-used space improvisation in a roof. I do the same thing at my house, and you're going to build a roof, you might as well use the space. It's the same size floor space. So, in all due respect, but we're not here to discuss, in my opinion, either. And I think we've had our hands slapped for doing that. So, thank you.
Yeah, I would take some exception to that. I think because of the fact that I will never, as chair of this committee, stifle any kind of discussion as it relates to any of these applications. Absolutely, under no circumstances would I. So just so we're clear on that. All right. Any further from anyone? Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Oh. Now, this is a
Again,
surprise.
that is myself, right? So yes, I think we've covered everything I need to cover.
Me, myself, and I. Go ahead, Ms. Murchison. Yes, did you wish to speak to it at all?
No, I have nothing further.
Are there any questions of Ms. Murchison? Mr. Str-
Thanks. Just not to prolong the discussion, and I'm fine with this application whatsoever. Where I have a problem is that, I think we need some consistency because over the years, seeing these boathouse applications come, as you have, Mr. Chairman, it seems that this discussion comes up about height and living quarters and so on. And I know there's a number of people who are anticipating, would like to put a second or a storage space above. And so I think we need to be consistent in what the message is, and perhaps we are being consistent, but it seems to be a topic that comes up on a regular basis.
Totally agree with you. We've had these discussions before, and I think we've even in the past added conditions that there be no habitable human habitation within those spaces. And then we're kind of advised that, well, that isn't really necessary because, perhaps I'm off base a bit here now, but we talk about these ARUs and, there's a little more flexibility with respect to that sort of thing. But you're absolutely right. We have these discussions all the time, but we need to have these discussions on each and every application. Otherwise, we're not completing the circle. And I like circles that are completed. All right. So, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to this application?
As president.
Councillor Yeo moving, Ms. Richardson seconding. Any further comments or questions with respect to the motion on the floor? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. All right, moving right along. We are now dealing with file number D20-2022-025. This is 23 Sparrow Court, Geographic Township of Maripasa. And again, Manager of Planning, Ms. Berry. Go ahead, Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You are one busy lady.
Well, I'm thinking we've introduced rotating chairs into some of our team meetings, and I'm thinking rotating presentation of reports might be an idea, just to give us some variety. All right, so we're here at 23 Sparrow Court. We're from one lake to the next today. So we're in the Pleasant Point community, adjacent to Scugog, between Sarnia to the west, Valencia to the east, and Little Britain to the northeast. The application submitted to us by Tom DeBoer of TD Consulting, Inc., on behalf of the owner, Angela Dinham. This one is to permit an additional residential unit, ARU, hot topic today, on a lot with a lesser lot area than required, given the available services here. The lot is just over 2,000 square meters, about half an acre. It's got municipal water, private septic system, and access to a municipal road. The ARU is intended to be built within an addition to the rear of the single detached dwelling outlined in red on this slide. You'll see that a new septic system is proposed to serve the ARU tucked into the rear corner of the property. All right, this slide gives us an idea of how the proposed addition, again outlined in red, is sited in relation to the other structures on the lot and the surrounding residential and recreational uses on either side. For some context, the lot is situated at the southerly extent of Sparrow Court on the east curve of the cul-de-sac. Vegetated yard and streetscape screens the front of the home from the road. You see, pointing at the garage of the house in question there with the red arrow. All right, so here's a shot of the back of the home indicating in plan and on site the location of the proposed addition. We've assessed the 4 tests, and I'll summarize the evaluation now. Mr. Chair, the application is minor in terms of its impact on environmental features, municipal functions, and neighboring land uses. Kawartha Conservation confirms that the lot is within the wellhead protection area for the Pleasant Point Municipal Groundwater System. The applicable source protection plan, and here again, the Trent Conservation Coalition, SPP, identifies policies for significant drinking water threats as well as areas to which those protection policies apply. The continuation of the residential use doesn't warrant a notice under the Clean Water Act. KRCA, though, always encourages best management practices to protect the water supply by reducing impacts where possible. So best management practices, BMPs, things like water conservation, of course that can take place in the home or in the yard, or recycling, disposing of hazardous waste properly, using non-toxic cleaning products, cleaning up pet waste in the yard, of course, reducing or eliminating to the extent possible pesticides, fertilizers, salts, and of course maintaining, in this case, not just 1, but 2 septic systems. There are no anticipated impacts on the function of the municipal right-of-way with respect to access or drainage. And so on that note, let's go back to slide 28 and the aerial. All right, so this proposed addition, sited to the rear of the dwelling behind the existing garage and set well back from the nearest residential dwelling, along with the dense vegetative buffer along the east property line that screens the addition from the adjacent recreational use associated with what appears to be a private resort area. There was a sign, Buckman's Sunny Shores, that I found at its entrance from a driveway off the easterly extent of Pleasant Point Road to the north. Wasn't aware of too much else about that. I canvassed members of our team and took a look through social media avenues, but didn't find a whole lot about Buckman's. So, although a very well manicured tennis court a few years ago, or pickleball perhaps. So we can conclude that the proposed use here definitely is compatible with the surrounding residential land uses. In our estimation, no anticipated impacts on neighboring properties. So the proposal, desirable and appropriate for the use of the land because it'll facilitate the development of a new housing option. In this case, it's an opportunity to provide the homeowner's mom, who is aging, with an opportunity to stay home and age in place relatively independently, but with the support of family if needed and when needed. So the addition is well sited. It complements the existing dwelling. It also maintains the intent of the rural residential type 2 exception 1 zone. That is a mouthful, RR2-1. Within the Mariposa zoning bylaw, it permits the existing dwelling, and it also permits an ARU as of right, provided, of course, that all of the zone provisions are upheld. So the 4,000 square meter minimum lot area requirement for the ARU, that was established specifically with reference to private services on a property. So when I say private, I mean an individual well and a private septic system. That was a size that comfortably ensured the necessary separation distances between services and structures, but also still provided for some adequate open space for drainage and amenity space. Lot areas under that threshold of 4,000 square meters do require us to review, determine whether the lot has the carrying capacity to handle the nitrate loading. Now, every site is different because topographic features are different, the placement of services, utilities, structures, all different, so every case is evaluated on its own merits. In this case, the availability of partial services is the real kind of push across the finish line, if I can put it that way. The fact that there's municipal water here, we're not relying on a private well, that together with the septic, and in particular, the use of a new septic system, an advanced treatment system, really do set up the right scenario to ensure that we aren't contravening the carrying capacity potential of the property. And finally, the variance maintains the intent and purpose of the waterfront designation. Here we are again, the members will recall, the extent of the waterfront designation does go beyond lands just adjacent to the shoreline. This is another example of that. Certainly permits this form of limited permanent residential developments in proximity to the lakes, recognizing in this case the low density residential character. In our opinion, this addition certainly does do that, both because of its low building profile and because the use is compatible. The ARU policies have, I think, nestled in quite comfortably and nicely in the official plan by making it possible to introduce, ever so gently, a little bit of increased density in a way that still upholds the intentions and the objectives of the official plan. I think this is a really great example of accomplishing that. I will flip to our last slide, Mr. Chair, to wrap things up. You're all waiting with bated breath. All right. We see from this slide the south elevation in the foreground from the rear yard, and we would, as indicated by the dashed red line, what we could anticipate seeing sort of from the background, from the west, behind the staircase that leads up to the primary dwelling's rear deck. Moving on to the comments. As a result of circulation, in accordance with the Act, of course, since writing the report, we did receive a call from a neighbor concerned about the impacts of the ARU to on-street parking in the cul-de-sac. Also concerned whether this was an indication that municipal sewers were being planned for the area, which they are not, and some questions around tenancy and whether non-family members could rent the dwelling unit, which, yes, they could. But so too, could this be the case in any residence, not just along this street, but in this neighborhood or in any neighborhood? Okay, so since Council adopted the new ARU policies and zone provisions, we did comment then, and continue to this day, track the registrations of new ARUs in the city, and whether we see any correlation with nuisance impacts, complaints related to parking through our colleagues in municipal law enforcement. And we have seen no such uptick in nuisances in that regard. I did share that with the neighbors as well. All right, so with respect to the internal city divisions, no concerns or objections from our colleagues in the septic division or in engineering. Building has flagged, of course, that the ARU will need to get registered and that building and septic permits be obtained. All right, I will park things there, Mr. Chair, and conclude that the variance does satisfy the 4 tests and we recommend it be approved.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Other questions? Yes, Ms. Archer, go ahead.
Through you, please, to Ms. Berry. Could you go, please, back to the aerial photo? And could you please show me the where the municipal drain that we're speaking about is situate? Not drain right away.
Mr. Chair, the municipal right-of-way extends from the front lot line of the dwelling to the sort of top left of the photo. That's the cul-de-sac at the end of Sparrow Court, if I'm understanding your question correctly. The municipal right-of-way, Sparrow Court. That's right. Does that give us any better indication of the extent or the reach of the municipal right-of-way? Or there, perhaps?
often just shows a, you know, a dotted line that shows where the right-of-way. I wondered if it were down the side of the property, but if it's around the front, then that's fine. It's more like the roadway is what you're saying, correct?
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, the roadway.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Berry, perhaps you could clear up for me. It seems to me when we first talked about ARUs, there was a suggestion that they did not apply to waterfront properties. There was a limitation there for understandable reasons, and yet now here we are approving one in a waterfront area. Could you clear that up for me? Because, as I say, I was on the understanding they weren't permitted on waterfront properties.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Mr. Chair, through you, and this is where we drill down into the components of what's included within the waterfront land use designation versus a waterfront lot. Okay, so a waterfront lot, i.e. a shoreline lot, i.e. a lot that abuts water, or even lots that are set back from the water's edge. Often in waterfront areas, we see private roads, private rights-of-way, we see full private services, and that type of characterization of a neighborhood would not be appropriate to increase density in, simply because the level of services needed potentially to provide for that lot aren't available. When we have full municipal services or partial municipal services, including municipal road and in this case municipal water, that's the distinction that the official plan recognizes and would permit an ARU so long as, again, we're looking at a specific building type, a single family home, a semi or a town, in areas that are of an appropriate size and comply with all the other zone provisions. Okay, so not just the waterfront designation itself, there is no sort of mass prohibition against ARUs on lots that are designated in the official plan as waterfront because, and as evidenced here, there are lots that although they're designated in that land use category, they meet all of the minimum requirements, those being for municipal access and service. Does that help distinguish between a lot that is only accessible by a private road and on private services compared to this situation?
Yes, exactly. And I hear what you're saying. I'm thinking of exceptions here now. For example, we had a presentation from Southview Estates earlier. Would it not be possible in Southview Estates to have a waterfront property on municipal water? Would they be permitted an ARU, even though they're waterfront property?
Sure, Mr. Chair, I'll just continue on and say, so long as, again, we've got access to a year-round municipal maintained road, an improved road, with the municipal services or private services, if lot areas and other zone provisions are met, there would not be a reason that would restrict or prohibit an ARU from locating in that neighborhood either. So I've, Mr. Chair, heard the members say a couple of times a waterfront property, and so again, we'll just distinguish the waterfront property from being within a waterfront land use designation and not necessarily to conflate the two. We do also have situations across the city where lands adjacent to water are actually designated not waterfront at all, and they might be in a rural designation or an environmental protection designation. So we can dive into that more deeply if you have any follow-up questions in that regard.
Thanks. I'll leave it for that for now. I think, Mr. Chairman, you may understand my concern.
I just think we're learning all kinds of new stuff here today. Ms. Berry, I thank you for that, and Ms. Murchison, because there's, I thought waterfront's waterfront, and that's not the case at all. I thought boathouses were boathouses. That's not the case either. So it's a great day. Is there anything further from committee, Ms.?
Yes, please. Back to the aerial photograph again, please. What is oops, sorry, I see the red outline of what's going to be built. What is the building or whatever be just beside that? It looks like it's going to be awfully close to the new building.
Mr. Chair, thank you to the member for the question. I actually did pose the question quite recently to the agent on the file. And again, sorry, similar to our first file, I'm not certain if Mr. DeBoer is with us on the call. But if we may, Mr. Chair, through you, see if he is, and if I may defer to him to address that collection of structures, which again, we'll note that this is a 2018 image.
Well, I think we'll just hold because we'll consider Mr. Boer part of the applicant and the application process. So are there any further questions of the, and whoever had that question, please hang on to it. And are there any further questions of the manager? All right, Bean. Then Mr. DeBoer, you are representing the applicant, I presume?
Good afternoon, members of the committee and staff. Yes, I am representing the owner of the property, Angela Dingham. Just to be very clear, number one, Leah did present a photograph that was from 2018. My client actually purchased a property in 2021, June to be exact, so just under a year ago. The structure that's represented in that photograph was actually removed by the previous owner, and the backyard of this dwelling unit and property in total is actually completely vacant, just grass. Regarding that, even if it was there, it would have to be removed in order to facilitate the proposed septic system for the dwelling unit that's been proposed. And then I also note that there was an additional comment that Ms. Berry brought forward with regards to a neighbor concern with parking. Fortunately, because this is a cul-de-sac lot, the driveway is very long and it is double wide. And myself, I personally parked there, and there's no less than 6 cars that could physically park completely and wholly contained within the driveway and on the parking lot, which far exceeds the number of 4 parking spaces, which is 2 per dwelling unit in the normal realm of the zoning bylaw. So we do exceed that. And if there's any additional concerns, questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Thank you, sir. We do appreciate your comments. Questions of Mr. DeBoer? It's your lucky day. All right. And thank you again for your presentation. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to this application? Our freewheeling day today. All right. Committee, Ms. Robinson. All right. And seconded by Ms. Archer. Any further comments or questions on the motion on the floor? Councillor?
Yeah, and fully in support of it, and it's nice to see something come here that I think is using this new ARU in the right way, and it's to bringing their family in to live with them in their end years and stuff, and it's just wonderful to see. Thank you.
And I agree with those comments, so absolutely. Anything further then? Okay. All those in favor? And that carries. All right. All right, we've got, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-077, and I'm sure you've all had a chance to read the memorandum from Ms. Berry with respect to this matter, but I will ask her to speak to it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will simply refer to the memo and remind the committee of its direction a couple of months ago that this file return no later than today's meeting date. So we are here to close the loop on that and to address the condition of the committee. Very recently, in fact, on May the 10th, the proponent ended up deciding to withdraw the minor variance application due to revising and reviewing the comments that had come in from the first public meeting, the statutory public hearing a couple months ago, concerns of the neighbors, and taking all of that into consideration, sort of have taken the plans back and seen that they can revise the site plan and eliminated the need for the variances that they were seeking through the application. So on May the 10th, they withdrew their application, and that completes that process. No further decision needed from this committee, Mr. Chair.
Questions on the committee? Ms. Richardson?
Through you for clarification, then, does that mean they are building a 4-story apartment building now then, and not the 6-story?
Mr. Chair, the plans are still with the proponent, with the developer, and are being revised, and that process through the site plan application, development application, is continuing on with review with staff in our department. Now, the maximum permitted height, whether it's the 4-story or anything else, without meeting that zone provision, we would be seeing a like application here at this committee. So the height, as far as I'm concerned, is being met in the revision. The maximum height in that zone. Shall we be reminded of what that is? It'll be by number of meters as opposed to stories. Is that relevant? Does that help answer your question?
Not really, because I want to know how many stories, because the people in the area objected to the 6 stories. When they were told when they purchased their property, it would be a 4-story building, and I don't know how many meters each unit would be. So therefore, the height you give me would mean nothing to me.
Mr. Chair, I'll just further comment that until I see any finalized plans as a result of the revisions, it would be perhaps premature or irresponsible for me to commit to any particular story at this time. But I'm certainly happy to update the committee as a matter of interest once there are revised plans. And to that end, the developer has committed to sharing their plans with the members who had raised concerns and making their development plans available to the neighbors.
Follow?
As a follow-up, will there be another public meeting for the neighborhood so they can provide additional comments?
Mr. Chair, can I just ask for clarification? To the member, to what extent would you mean a public meeting? There certainly isn't a requirement for a public meeting in terms of a statutory process with the site plan application
And
review.
that's I meant. Is there still another statutory public meeting? Because I know they've had one for the minor variance. They no doubt had one initially. Is there a requirement for a further public meeting so that the neighborhood will know what is happening there?
Mr. Chair, I'll just continue. There's no requirement for a statutory public meeting through the site plan process, no.
I would think maybe a better approach there would be if we maybe make it, or note, we won't note, but just for the planning department, that if the public does have some questions, are they afforded the opportunity to speak with planners on a future basis?
Mr. Chair, there isn't anything preventing any of the residents from contacting the planner or the developer directly. They can do that to have questions answered, but they can also contact our staff on the development team reviewing the site plan with questions about the designs or the redesign of the proposed building.
And thank you for that. And I believe that given the fact that we heard from some of them at the previous meeting a couple of months ago, they are probably aware of that, I would think. So, Ms. Richardson, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know how the neighborhood would even be aware that they can do this, because most of the general public are not aware of the total planning process. But I know I've been by that lot, and I don't know how you'd get 2 houses on there, let alone a 4 or 6-story apartment. And if I lived there, I would totally object to people overlooking my backyard.
Maybe I'll stop you there. I think maybe we'll, for a minute, we'll hang on to Councillor Yo's previous comments, that I think maybe we're talking about something that has no relevance now with the committee. I think the decision's been made. There has been new conditions with respect to that whole building operation, in that they comply now with zoning issues or wherever. There's no variance required, so it's not really a matter for us anymore. So I understand what you're saying, certainly, and that's why I asked Ms. Berry. I'm sure there will be questions. I just want to ensure that the planning department is open to those questions if they should come, and you indicated they were, so I think that's where we're at. All right, anything further? Right. I think what I'd like is a motion to receive this memorandum, just so it closes the circle. I heard that before. Mr. Strangway, Ms. Richardson. All right, so the motion on the floor is to receive this documentation from the Manager of Planning, Ms. Berry. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right, get my glasses on here so I can see the table. Okay, there's no consents. Anything under other business from committee members? Anything under other business from staff members? Ms. Berry, did you have anything to add to that? No. I have a question for you. And first of all, I want to say accolades to you, because I don't know how you're doing it. You're the manager as well as attempting to process these applications as they come in too. And full marks to you. Leah, I'm not sure how you do it, but you're doing it, and much appreciated. But I guess my question would be this. We've had complaints in the past about how slow the process is with the city and some of these building applications. Is the fact that we are, and I understand the problems we have, so, but is it going to impede the applications moving forward for a while, and if so, dramatically, or I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you can give me some kind of a response, I'm just curious.
Sure. And perhaps I'll start just by thanking you for your introductory comments, but it is only something that I accomplished because of the team around me. And Charlotte, certainly, and Mark keep me on track and in check. So the work is being done by a massive effort by more than certainly just myself. And I thank everybody for their help, especially in this transition period, while we staff up and complete our recruitment cycle, which we are very near to doing. We're waiting for a few lines to be signed, sort of on the dotted line, and I will have some exciting news for us at our next meeting. Well, thank you for that. All right. Here's what I'm also excited about, and that is with the director's support and latitude, if I can put it that way, we have had a very good opportunity in the last, certainly, month, but it extends back a couple of months even before that, to dive very deep into this not just minor variance process, but in fact all the applications that are subject to the Committee of Adjustment decision-making process. And so pretty excited about some of the streamlining opportunities that we have touched on and that we have already started to implement. Perhaps this is because Leah's just going full throttle. That is one of the reasons. Prior to joining the city, I did have 15 years as a development planner. So yes, I am putting on my planner hat in the last couple of meetings and now again, and for the next couple of meetings as well. Thank you for that. Yes, you're right. As a quick study. And so very familiar with the application process and where the bottlenecks are, and not just as a result of additional volume or workload, that sometimes either because of the bureaucratic or administrative processes outside of the statutory guidelines or restrictions that we do have to stick to, and there are some time commitments with that in the Planning Act, but I think that we are finding a nice Middle Earth in between the administrative side of things and the statutory requirement side of things. So I'm actually quite enthusiastic about some of the changes that we are implementing and that we're going to see in the next few months. I've had an opportunity to connect with more people in the last 3 weeks, residents of our community, both seasonal and permanent, who have had files with us for a number of months and have shared our plans with them. And we have, for example, already taken a look at some of the applications that started as inquiries or pre-screenings that you've heard of before when applications are brought forward as minor variances. You've heard sometimes in reports references to the precursor to the minor variance application, the pre-screenings, and looking at the value of those pre-screening applications, what they lend themselves to in the variance application process, but also recognizing there's some occasions where we can leapfrog right into the minor variance application queue. And there were no less than 15 of these sort of outstanding inquiries where through a conversation with the proponents, with the applicants, we were able to move them forward. Now, there is some understanding on the applicant's part that they will not see June, for example, the June meeting, but are targeted for July and August. That's how far out we are looking at this point. So although I brought to you 4 applications today, and of course the deferral, okay, 5, let's call it what it is, we are tracking for about 9 or 10 for the next couple of months. And so, yes, I know, if you're feeling that way, think about what I'm thinking, but it's a good thing. In some way, if that provides any kind of an answer to your question about, is this going to cause an even longer delay while we sort of get staffed up and sort of get back on track, if I could suggest we're not really off track. We were just taking a slower step forward temporarily, but by no means are we pausing the machine from moving forward.
And I thank you for that. I don't personally have a problem. We've had to load the agenda up before with 9. I think we've even been as high as 11, and I recall some evenings here where it was like 5:30 or better when we got out of here. But if that's helping move the process along and creating a better perception with the public as to what the city's doing, then I'm all for that. I think it's great, so don't worry about that. Now, I think you may have alluded to these, the 2 planners that we've got on board. I don't know if you did, but maybe you could just educate us a little bit with that, because you were saying that both these ladies have been with the city for a while, and in the not too distant future, you're hoping to have them making some presentations. Do you wish to speak to that?
At the risk of stepping on the toes of our HR department, if I may be so bold as to ask you just to put a pin in that question, I would be very happy to tell you everything you might want to know about our successful candidates at our next meeting when the ink dries, if I may ask for your indulgence there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for that. So absolutely. Anything further? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's it. All right, then, I guess all I need is a motion to adjourn. Ms. Richardson, Councillor Yeo, all those in favor? Never had a negative there, never.